Cool. Today on the Joe and Friendsen show, we got Nick Singh. He's the author of Ace the Data Science Interview. Nick, what's up?
What's up, Joe? Thank you for having me, man. I'm really excited.
Anytime.
This is a long time coming and listened to your
Yeah.
podcast before, so I'm really excited to do this.
Likewise, yeah. I think we've seen each other in around each other's orbits for quite a while now, and I
Yep.
think we ran into you on Harpreet Sahota's office hours.
Yep.
It's been a bit ago, but that was pretty cool. So,
Yeah.
for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Nick Singh. I'm the author of Ace the Data Science Interview right here, this bad boy. Before this, I worked at Facebook. I interned at Google. I went to the University of Virginia where I studied systems engineering. So I've always had a mixture of software and data experience, did a little bit of ML here and there. But these days, what I'm doing is just empowering other data scientists, data analysts, machine learning engineers, even a few data engineers. I know we got a lot of data engineering folks, who follow you. Just helping them advance in their analytical careers, ace these interviews because there is a process and they are annoying, and just trying to make it just a little bit easier for companies to hire good people,
Mm.
but also people to get good jobs that they deserve, so they don't just shoot themselves in the foot when interview time comes.
That's interesting. I mean, walk me through the progression. You've had jobs at Fangs, right? And like, walk me through the desire to write a book on this. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
dude. Career's been super weird, and that's one of the things, people ask me, what's your like biggest takeaway, is just like, wow, life is crazier than you can plan. Like, because when I started out, I was a software engineer at Facebook, okay, on the growth team. So this is where you do data driven work all day long, where you're trying to improve metrics like engagement and retention through A/B tests. And basically, you'd cut data all day, implement different tests, and see what was working, what was not, to drive these key metrics. So it's a very data driven role. I left that to join an alternative data company called Safegraph, where I joined as
Mm,
head of marketing. That was a huge YOLO move. So I'm a big fan of Drake, and there's that song, the motto YOLO, you only live once, right?
yeah,
Do you listen to hip hop?
I do actually.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I mean, with that kind of fresh haircut,
And
there's
background, yeah. So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Of course. So I was just like, all right, let me change up things, because I thought the world was bigger, and I had other skills. So when I joined this alternative data company and held a bunch of different roles there, but all non-technical there, which was a super big change from the data engineering work I did at Google, the growth engineering work I did at Facebook, the internship I did with the
That is a
Navy in
big
data
jump.
science. I've spanned the spectrum, but data's always been there. And I knew that there was an opportunity here to like help data scientists, because I was so surprised with cracking the coding interview and cracking the PM interview, but they're just not being the equivalent for data science. So that's kind of what brought me into this spot of like, wow, I've seen the non-technical side of data science. So I think I know how to write a little bit. I know how to put up some blog posts, but then I also seen the technical side. I've gone through these really tough SQL and coding interviews and been asked math questions randomly and probability brain teasers. So I wanted to bring those two together. And it all came together last year when COVID hit. Everyone, job offers got rescinded. People lost their internships. All kinds of crazy stuff happened. I was like, all right,
It was
this
a
might
hard
be the
time for
chance.
sure. So,
They talk about that great resignation, and I feel like I'm very much part of it. It was like, oh, wow, maybe I should
interesting.
quit my job and do something else because I'm stuck at home, and maybe this is what I should do. So yeah, that's the story there.
That's really cool. I mean, writing a book's a lot of work. So I
Yeah,
know
I know you're writing a book. Tell a little bit more about that.
yeah, I just had a data engineering book with
Yeah,
O'Reilly, but
yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of work, man. So
It's
I
it's it's a
feel like
lot of work,
it's
but
like a second full-time job.
yeah, but it's worth it when it's done. When it's done, it's worth it, just to see people like actually get the book and just like DM you on LinkedIn or Twitter, just be like, "Oh, I got your book. It's been really helpful to get a job." And I know, data engineering again is like one of those places that's hot, but maybe that not as much has been written on it as should be.
You can write the
Just
acing the data engineering interview next.
dude,
So
let's write it together, man.
yeah, that'd be dope. So yeah, that's interesting, though. I mean, walk me through this. 'Cause I think there's a lot of I would dare say misconceptions, but there's a lot of mystique certainly about data interviews, especially at
Yeah,
FANG companies. I mean, can you walk us through maybe some of the themes you saw?
totally. So just so everyone's on the same page, right? A data interview at a company like Facebook, for example, they'll often ask a coding question, which you can practice on LeetCode or HackerRank, usually on the easier side compared to software engineers or even data engineering interviews. They're going to ask you to write some SQL. they might ask you like a probability or statistics question. Sometimes these verge on brain teasers where it's about counting cards or, probability of a coin flip, blah, blah, blah. Those kind of questions you might have seen in like middle or high school, just random questions. So you're going to ask that. They're going to ask you some statistical questions about like concepts like central limit theorem or z-test, t-test, tell me more about chi-square test, when you'd use it, things like that. And then lastly, they had these product sense interviews. And this is a little bit surprising to a lot of folks. These are the kind of more open-ended, businessy, producty, kind of more nebulous questions where it's just like question like, what metrics would you use to track Uber's surge pricing algorithm was successful? Like, what would you look into?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah. And there's no right answer. And there's probably a bunch of metrics that Uber's tracking internally. And that's like not a test of like how good you are at writing SQL. That's a test of like, hey, have you been around the block? Do you have some
Right.
kind of business and product sense on like, what do you think Uber stakeholders care about?
What's your sense of the mix of these types of questions? Because there's definitely the can you solve this problem type of questions. Those are pretty binary. Either you get it or you don't, right? But then there's also how do you think type questions. What do you have you seen like a certain mix of these?
Yeah, no,
types?
definitely. Every question always leans towards how do you think? Like, even if you get an answer right, but you solved it stupidly, or you get an answer wrong, but you get 80% of the way there thinking in the right way, you're always going to get credit. So even in there's a right and wrong answer kind of question, there's still some leeway. I think the leeway goes away a bit. Like, the most cutthroat ones might be SQL, where it's just sort of like, hey, if we're going to give you an easy SQL question, it's just testing if you can join some data sets and then write a simple where clause, and you mess that up, there's not a lot of room. But from the more complex SQL questions, there's even still some room there of people, getting close enough and writing the right subqueries, but maybe missing a piece or not knowing too much about a certain, maybe they forget their regexes and they don't know how to filter with their like clause, for example.
Right.
But it's almost always about like, tell me how you think. There's always that benefit there.
I know when I hire people, I'm more interested in that question because I think there's a lot of Googleable answers. Like, but at the same time, there's stuff that you and I will probably just get wrong, just because it is simple stuff too, right? Because everyone gets stuff wrong.
Yeah,
And it
exactly.
just probably isn't your day, right? So
Yeah.
you know, I'm
Well, I actually want to push back on that. I want to
okay.
push back on that because actually this is something bigger about like test taking and everyone and everything. I think people always tell like, oh, I'm just not a good test taker, and I've just all my life
Mm,
hated that. Maybe it's because Joe, I am a good test taker. Maybe that's why I'm someone who's good at tests. But I mean, I don't want to buy into that argument too much of like, oh, like I don't really know what a confidence interval is. Today was my off day. There are definitely some level, like bare bones questions, really crucial questions that you should be able to talk through. And if you can't tell me about the assumptions of linear regression, sure, maybe you don't know all of
right.
it. But like if you just don't know it, there were assumptions, or you're like, I don't remember a single, like I only know like lm.fit, linear model.fit. Like I don't know anything beyond that. That's a problem, right? And of course there is
Yeah,
a
I would
way to
agree on
Google
that
that,
part for
but
sure.
that's one of those things where it starts to be like, hey, be careful, because it's really easy, Joe. And that's why I want to call this out, is because it's so easy to rationalize, like, I just got nervous. But it's like, do you really? Because if it was a really hard math problem, you missed a zero or something like that, that's fine. But if you can't talk about linear regression, especially if I see on your resume you list that you've done projects with it,
Right. Yeah, that's bad.
then it starts becoming like, yeah, you could Google it, but like if you really did this project last year, you'd probably
Still
know.
fresh. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like some of my math classes where like, I had this professor that would dock you lots of points for missing a comma in a proof.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff, I'd be like,
No,
yeah, in an
no,
interview, I
no.
know you're stressed out yeah, but I take your point too, where it's like there's baseline knowledge. And if you
Yeah.
exhibit, and I also want to know how you think about solving these types of baseline problems, like linear
Yeah.
regression, for example, right? Not just
Yeah.
lm.fit, but how does regression work?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's always just like you're gonna get bonus points or like some credit for like giving a rough answer. So, even if you don't remember all the math behind PCA, can you talk through what PCA does, or like when you might want to use
Right.
PCA? What's the
Yeah.
benefit of PCA? Like what's the point of it? Because I'm sure you don't need to know the math, as you're gonna use a library for that. But at least you should be able to talk about what PCA is about.
Comments here. Yeah, so we got some friends here. Harpreet, what's going on?
What's up?
Yeah, we got George. Looking forward to the book we'll write together at some point. I mean, we'll talk about that. But yeah, these are some awesome homies in the data world. In fact, Harpreet, shout out. I actually met Nick on your show.
Yeah.
Chatted with him after, so that's pretty awesome. So yeah,
Your happy hour is bringing people together. It's
it
really
really
bringing
does,
people in the
man.
community. And actually, same way I met Kenji, who I'm doing a podcast with later.
Nice.
Later next week. So yeah, I mean, Harpreet's bringing the community, and I also, I mean, I admire all you podcast folks because I mean, I just wrote the book. Now I just go on all your shows, but you guys always bring community together. So I've never done one of these lives myself.
Nick will be live with you later. Okay, that's cool.
Yes,
So,
yeah, and of
nice.
course, yeah, I had to give. Yeah, how did I forget? Harpreet and I were talking today too. Yeah,
that's sick. Yeah, man, that's so cool. Yeah, it's kind of cool actually. What I like about the world of content is everyone's doing their thing, and I think everyone's really supportive of each other. You think that we all like hate each other and try to be each other's enemies. It's like, oh, he's getting attention
no, Joe,
doing
I
this.
do hate you. I'm sorry.
Well, that's why I had you on the show actually. So
yeah.
You can do a cage match or something.
Yeah.
But no, it's awesome. Everyone's really supportive of each other's content and what each other's doing, and you know, I think it's awesome because I realized too, like content, it's not a zero-sum game. Like consulting is very much a zero-sum game where it's like you get a deal or I get a deal, but both of us ain't gonna deal together. So content's very multiplicative. And how many books do you have on your shelf, right?
Yeah, all these other books, none of them are a competitor. And guess what? All of them will help you ace the interview, like in different pieces, in different bits. Like your data engineering book, even if it doesn't talk about interviews, it's gonna help people, right? But that's the beauty, right? It's about coming together, and every person has their own little part of the community that they help run or do, and then that helps the whole ecosystem in general. And I think I like what you talked about consulting, just overall in my experience in tech, partly why I love being in technology and just vibing out with other data scientists, software engineers, data engineers, is that this whole field feels very much like not zero sum. Feels like everything's growing year after year. There's more jobs and more work to go around than can be done, which is why there's such a emphasis on like mentorship and like sharing what you're learning, right? Because if this was a zero-sum game and I learned some secret stuff, I wouldn't want anyone else to know it. But this isn't that kind of game, actually. It's all about empowering the next generation of folks, which is why I wrote the book in the first place. And it's like, fine, right? I'm giving away the secrets to work at these big companies, but like they are actually happy if more people come apply to them because they themselves are struggling to find good talent. So
well, I have directors from these companies. I have directors from these companies calling me, asking me if I know data engineers. And I'm like, don't you have armies of recruiters that should be out looking for people for you? Like, why are you calling little old me? You know, and then, but it's what I think is going on too is there's a big vetting crisis, and just basically finding sort of the you know, the diamonds in the rough, so to speak, as well. Just because it's a job seeker's market, you know, assuming you have the baseline skills and so forth. And I know every single company is scrambling for talent. And I was talking to somebody yesterday about this actually, who actually used to run a recruiting firm, and he's been in the tech industry for a very long time. You know, we were just talking about the challenges of hiring. Like the takeaway from the call is that neither of us knew how to really fix it. It's you know, it's a supply problem at this point. There just simply is not the supply of data people.
Exactly. And I want to noodle on this too, right? Because I feel like this book is helping close that gap, but there's still enough of a gap because I can't pretend like this one book will fix everything. It's not nowhere close to that. So who knows? Maybe we need more books like this, or you know.
But what else do you think that is needed though? Because I mean, you're helping people ace the interview, but there's certain skills you need to get before you even get to getting the interview, and then there's all these other things you got to get. You got to get an interview before you can ace it, and so forth.
I honestly think, man, so much, and like I know this is gonna sound a little woo-woo, you know, it's a little fake, but I think a lot of it, like after this book, like if I'm actually tasked to do this, I think it's gonna be like about teaching people a mindset, about building more. Like, hey, don't just sit there and consume content, create projects, create portfolio projects, build these skills. You know, there's only so many Coursera classes you can take. At some point you have to start building something and like putting things on your portfolio that are you yourself are driving and thinking about critically, you know? So I honestly think that's one big thing that needs to be done, right? Because this book helps you ace the interview, but to get these interviews, you need a strong resume and you need strong projects, right? And like that would be one thing I'd tell people. And the other thing I'd tell people is I'm a big fan of salary transparency, and I talk about salary negotiation all the time. I think people don't realize how much money is in the field. And I think if we did a better job educating folks, in their first year of college or when they're in high school to take, hey, you should take your math classes seriously, or you should keep playing around with HTML. It's not a waste of time. Sure, it's just making a little website right now, but who knows where that will lead down to. I think telling people that, because did you see that kind of survey that said like kids these days want to be like creators? Like YouTube creators, the number one job, and used to be astronaut, used to be scientist, doctor, all those kind of things.
No, my 8-year-old wants to be a YouTube influencer.
Right.
And he's already making videos.
Yeah. Okay.
And he makes merch. That's the other funny thing.
Okay, I mean, at 8 years old, I love it. And to be fair, I can't knock it too much because look at what we're doing right now. We're on YouTube, we're on LinkedIn, we talk about this stuff. But I mean, I think at some level, I mean, there's room for creators, but I just think that if people understood like, wow, at some of these top companies, an exec makes $10 million a year and there's thousands of them. Okay, we idolize these like basketball players or rappers, but like, wow, a senior level data scientist can crack $1 million at a company like Facebook or Airbnb. They don't tell you about that, right. And they think, and if they do, most people are quick to be like, oh yeah, but that person has like 30 years experience and manages 500 people. It's like, no, that person might be only managing like 6 people and cracking $1 million a year. But people don't even say that, Well,
it's such an outlier compared to what if your visibility is like, everyone's making 6 figures, maybe, right?
Yeah.
And it's sort of like saying, well, yeah, you can dribble a ball and you can become LeBron James too. It's not a problem, man. Just hustle, right?
Yeah.
But
that's what I'm trying to say. Like LeBron James is playing like a zero-sum game. Like he has to beat other people. I'm trying to say that there's armies of people who make $1 million a year who don't manage hundreds of people.
And there's lots of jobs open for this types of stuff.
And they're literally, they keep trying to hire at the staff level data science. And I'm not trying to tell everyone like, oh, you guys all will be staff level data scientists. But that's definitely still a much more sure thing than becoming LeBron James. You know what I mean? Like, these companies want to find more people and pay them $1 million a year. And I think what you also mentioned was you used the word 6 figures, right? There's a big difference between 100K and 500K. And people think like, oh yeah, you make 6 figures, I make 6 figures.
Right.
But people don't talk about that. Oh, actually those 6 figures might be like in the 3, 4, 5, 6, 700K range. When other people think, oh yeah, I mean, people don't realize that some of these engineers make more than doctors. A lot of them, especially at FANG, will be making more than a doctor or a lawyer, and without the credentials, without having to have gone into debt for, maybe with a master's, but even there's people with bachelor's degrees making that much, and you won't find a single doctor who can make that. They have to all go to med school. So I think just having some more transparency there around like, hey, you need to actually provide value, keep building. And 2, there's a lot of money in it, so don't give up. Stay in the field, like keep learning. I think those are the 2 big things that can actually like change this like talent imbalance. But I mean, that's going to take a lot of years. So short-term fix is this book, which is people who already have the skills, but maybe aren't presenting themselves as well as they could to kind of close that last mile gap.
You had something earlier too, which I noticed a lot, where people, I think they, instead of doing projects, instead of making stuff, they'll just endlessly do tutorials and take Coursera classes.
Yep.
And you become like expert at taking Coursera classes.
Yeah.
Which isn't the same thing as being able to do stuff.
Right. And I think the same thing goes with even certifications. People are always like, okay, what's the best certification? Should I do Google Analytics or the IBM one or this or that? And it's just like, those are good. Use them to practice your skills. But I don't think, you got to understand this is not one of those things where it's like, oh, you have a doctor's degree. What do you call it? A med school license? Whatever.
Like an MD?
MD, yeah.
Yeah.
You have that, you can be a doctor. This is not like one of those fields where it's like, oh, you have a certificate. Welcome in. Like, here's your 100K job. Like, it's way more than that. But I think people are still fixed with that mindset of like, what's the certificate or course I need to do this and like have everything work out. And our field has more variability, more paths, which is a good thing, which means more outsiders or people with non-traditional experience can come in. But in the same vein, it's also like, hey, there's not one single thing you can do.
There's not at all, man.
You have to.
Like I have a lot of certs. I have a ton of certs because I have to because of the business I run, right? So, but I run cert study groups too. And what's interesting is I get a lot of people who are asking, oh, I want to be a data engineer. How do I learn stuff? I'm like, well. And then the next question is, how do I get a cert? And I'm like, well, join my study group. I'll see you. If you show up, that's the first step. But then I quickly,
What's
what's that?
what cert what do you think is the best certification for data? I know this is hypocritical. I was like, don't
Yeah.
ask that question, but I'm curious. I don't like.
I
I'm
think
curious.
it's obviously the one that I think it's going to have a lot of market value, right? But also teaches skills. So I tend to weight towards maybe the GCP data engineering exam. I think it's really good. I think it does a good job at vetting your skills.
Yeah.
But definitely on GCP, but I think also as a data engineer to some extent. Obviously, as I tell the people in my study group, like you still need to like work as a data engineer to get the skills. Like having the
Right.
cert
Right.
on its own is sort of not really worth that much. But I think it is the highest paying IT cert right now.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
that's why.
Yeah. You definitely have to investigate. And definitely, maybe I'm denigrating all the certs too much because some things like I think if you've seen the Tableau desktop certification stuff, that stuff's easy. But maybe
Right.
GCP is more involved, and I know AWS definitely has some more meatier
Oh no,
ones
I
as
know people
well.
at Google Cloud who have actually one person I know, she actually helped write some of the questions for the exam, the data engineering exam, then took the exam, and then I think she didn't feel like she wasn't sure if she passed
Wow.
when she. So it's
Yeah,
hard. It's real
these
hard.
things are hard. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
like
I think
I walked out of it and I was like, I don't know if I passed or not.
right,
And then the thing is, when you leave these exams wondering too, like I don't know if I can do anything different next time I take it, right? But then, as
right.
you say, because I've taken other exams where it's like you could be hung over, and pass with flying colors. You'd be totally fine. So, um, but yeah, Guy actually has a kind of a question / statement here. This starts looking more like that experienced job meme. You need the job to get experience, but you can't get the job without experience. What are your thoughts on that? I'm sure you see
Yeah,
this a
man,
lot.
that catch-22, that vicious cycle where it's always like you need more experience to get experience. That's absolutely true. So, yeah, I mean, I think one of those things is there's this phrase, fake it till you make it, right? I don't want to be like, yo, just fake things because this is very substantial stuff. But I think one of the things is the cert, studying for a cert. That's great. I think let's use that GCP data engineering cert, for example. That's great. But then having some uh, portfolio projects that
Yeah,
independently show that you can not just answer multiple choice questions. I mean, is
right.
that a multiple choice exam?
It's a multiple. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But data engineering is not a multiple choice kind of job. At some point, you got to write some SQL or write some pipelines and
Hmm.
commit code on GitHub. So I think having that certification. So I guess I want to be clear. Like that's always fine, but just narrowing it down to like, oh, this is the cert I need for a job is not good. If you pair that up with, yeah, I can pass a multiple choice exam and you can see my GitHub where I've actually done stuff, then you
Yeah,
start getting closer. Now, of course, if you get an internship or a job, that's the best, right? That's the
it
best way to
is.
show you have experience. But this portfolio project approach, like nothing is stopping you from not committing to GitHub. You know what I mean? So that's one of those things where you can break out of the cycle through thanks to the fact that GitHub's free. You can do open source contributions. You can make your own projects.
What impresses me too is people, even after they got their first, second, third job, whatever, if they're still doing projects on the side, to me, that's an awesome signal that you're just motivated and you're in it to just be in it. And that's cool. To me, that also
Yeah,
separates you when you're going from job 1 to 2. Like if you're staying current and just doing, whatever projects just because you're interested in tech, to me, that's a huge signal
100%.
that either you're like a cool nerd, you have a lot of time in your hands, or you're just investing in your craft. And I think it's probably all three, to be honest. And that's cool.
It's
So
cool, right? And that's what I want to be clear of when I say there's so much money in our field and everything like that. Maybe an MD doesn't have to keep doing side project surgeries, on the side, like, oh yeah, for fun, I also do that. But in
I
our
do I do
field,
I
we
do foot
definitely
surgery on the side. Yeah, that's
yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but in our field, we definitely got to keep doing that. So as you mentioned, I just want to let people know when I'm talking about those 2, 3, 4, 5, 600K salaries, it is a lot of that too, where it's like, yeah, every year this field's changing, new tools are coming out, and you got to keep reading books, you got to keep listening to podcasts, you got to keep building things, and then you got to keep doing the people side as well of like more project management, business, people
Mm.
oriented skills in tandem with these hard technical skills. So this is definitely a field where you can't just, get a certain coast if you want to keep climbing your career.
Yeah, I think I always refer to it. It's called the steamroller technology. I think it was Stuart Brand who came up with that. And basically, he
Mm,
said you're either on the steamroller or you're getting run over by it. And that's
right.
kind of what I've seen. I think there's like a 2-year expiration date on most technologies. And so, and I think you focus on this too, where there's a skill side, like math, the underlying skills, and then there's the applied technology. But the technologies, they evolve, right? So I would
Yeah.
say definitely don't focus on the technology, focus on, I would say, improving your craft. What are your thoughts on that?
No, 100%. I when you can find these kind of more what's it called? Not system principles. Mental models. When you can come across a
Mm,
mental model that can explain not just what you're doing right now, but things in general, and you keep storing them, it's so important. It's so impactful. And I think mental models exist not just for technology. So you might see an architectural pattern like model view controller, and you'll see that, oh, that's in React, but that's also in Android, and that's in iOS, and it's everywhere, right? That's great, but there's actually mental models and these kind of frameworks and patterns for how organizations work, or like how businesses set goals and then achieve them, or how we do accounting, or like how do we measure the success of a project, and like what is a business looking for. Suddenly you realize, wow, all these businesses, they're either, it boils down to trying to earn money or save money, but most of the time they would rather make more money than try to save money somewhere else, right? And once you
right.
start realizing businesses follow these patterns, and I know that sounds really easy, right? Like that sounds like econ 101, accounting 101. It's like, hey, it's either about the money you're spending, or it's about the money you're bringing in, or it's about how much you're paying out. You got to just balance the two. But I think once you start thinking in terms of those terms, and you have this clear mental model, and you've seen it happen at multiple companies. Remember that Uber surge pricing thing I
Hmm.
brought up? How would you track what metrics would you use to track Uber surge pricing? You'd want to see, hey, how much did I have to pay out to drivers extra, and then how much money did I bring in? And I know that sounds like really obvious, but you'll be surprised. I've given this question in mock interviews. People stumble, people say all kinds of other metrics, but it's sort of like, hey, at a business, it boils down to those two things. How much did
Hmm.
search pricing bring in, and how much more did I have to pay in incentives? But people will say all kinds of stuff like latency or this or that or low level metrics. I'm like, hey, fam, remember this is a business. um, what's the business equations about these two variables? Let's make sure you mention those. So I'm just trying to say that there's a long-winded way of saying absolutely having these mental models and seeing these more patterns, in software engineering, they might be called design patterns, but I'm trying to go even one step more meta past software, and just like how do orgs, teams work. You can
Like
start learning
business
that.
patterns, maybe.
Business
Yeah.
patterns, yeah. Once you can start figuring out those business patterns and org patterns and like people patterns, like, hey, how do you
Yep.
motivate someone and like keep them motivated, or how do you like rescue a bad performer? You keep getting those patterns, writing them down, reflecting. The technology will come and go, but these patterns will stay the same. And that's definitely a way to level up. And I've definitely used that in my own life.
What were some of the surprising things you found out while you were writing this book?
Dude, writing a book was a mess. So one thing was, I think there's this really fun quote, not fun, sad but true quote, which is, if I knew how much work it would have been, I would have never done it, you know? And it's this kind of like, the book was way more work than I expected. Had I known how much work it would have been, I wouldn't have done it. But I think it's good. It's almost like it was good that I was naive, because it's good that I did the book.
Yeah.
And if I'd known upfront, there would be no way I committed to it. And I think people say this about startups too. So I think that was one of the first things that popped into my head. And Joe, I even knew this quote. Like I knew, like, oh, in software engineering, hey, you have an estimate, double it and then double it again. That's how
Right.
long it'll take. I
Hmm.
already did that. I did that to my book, and it still took longer than that. So I think that was one big thing that kind of really irked me. But I think I'm better for it. I think the second really interesting thing I learned was how big the internet is. And I think this is for anyone who's thinking about making a side hustle, a side project, whether that's content creation or a side SaaS project, or they want to teach their own SQL class, whatever it be. I didn't realize how big the internet was. Okay. And this sounds funny, right? Because I worked at Facebook. I worked on internet scale applications, right? I've been around the block. I have a big LinkedIn audience, and still I didn't understand, wow, there's a lot of people from all over the world who are trying to become data scientists, analysts, data engineers, who are looking towards my book, that I just didn't know. Know in the sense like, okay, like people are buying my book today, and I don't know who they are. I don't know where they're coming from, because they certainly, on my LinkedIn, I've talked about the book for the last 3-4 months. They should all know about it. So where are the people, the dozens of people who are buying the book today, where are they coming from? I have no idea.
Interesting.
But the beauty of Amazon is, hey, the world's demand. If you search up data science, my book should be the first one up. And I guess every day people are searching up data science, and some subset of them are reading the book. And then I guess everyone who's read the book the people who've liked it, and overwhelmingly most people have liked it. I think there's like 100 5-star reviews.
That's so
They're
cool.
telling a friend, and I don't know who their friends are because I don't even know who the people are writing the reviews. You can't even know who they are. It's most of the times anonymous or whatever. So I think that's another thing that really surprised me in writing the book. And I think it's just like this, the more generalizable idea would be just, guys, the internet's big and you don't know who you can impact or who you can help until you start doing it and putting your work out there. So whether that's an open source, library you want to put out there, or whether it's like a class you want to teach on SQL, or whether it's content creation, whatever it be, there is a market, and the internet enables you to go reach them at scales that wouldn't have been possible, just even 10, 15 years ago.
Do you have any indications like what geographies are more popular for your book?
Yeah, so actually, I think US is number 1, Canada's 2, UK's 3. But the issue is the book's only out in around 10 countries due to Amazon publishing stuff. So I know India is one that's been really asking for the book, but it's just not out yet in India. So I'm working on that. But
Cool.
yeah, it's been US centric because that's where my audience is. That's where I am. And that's honestly where most of these FANG type companies are doing their hiring. So, and US tech, like people don't realize, I mean, we're blessed to be in United States America because actually our tech scene is kicking ass compared to even something like in Europe. Like it's pretty surprising.
Oh yeah.
How much
Very
more
so.
hiring is happening. So I'm just grateful for it here.
Yeah, no matter where I go in the country now, it's always a question of hiring. Like, do you know of anybody I can hire? And they're like frenzied. Hiring managers like, oh my God, I need to find people, period. I'm like, I don't know of anybody. They all have jobs. So,
yeah. Things are good, but things can always be better, which is why it's like people are still job hunting and everything. So
that's so true. Walk me through what you've been seeing since you wrote the book. I mean, and changes in maybe job seeker patterns and hiring.
Yeah, it's hard to be data driven about this, but what I've been kind of surprised by is, this might sound a little elitist, okay, but I joined Facebook in 2017 and I went to the University of Virginia, and only 3 of us ended up working there out of maybe 250, 300 CS graduates. So 3 of us worked at Facebook, and I think maybe like 4 or 5 of us got jobs at Google. But now, and no one was really interning. So, and that was and even after I'd interned at Microsoft, I didn't get an interview at Facebook. This was in 2016, 2017. Now, from the University of Virginia, there's dozens of people interning itself at Facebook, and most of them get return offers, right? So I just noticed one interesting thing from, in my career and this time is like, hey, like as these companies get bigger and bigger, their talent pool starts expanding and expanding. So I've seen people who I wouldn't have thought would have been interviewed at Facebook, because even I used to not get interviews, even with like Microsoft on my resume, and my friends wouldn't get it either, because at that time, Facebook wasn't, because this is again kind of elitist, but there was a time at Facebook they only hired from Harvard and MIT and Stanford, and that was it, And then it became, oh, we'll do Ivy League plus Berkeley. And then it became, oh, we'll go to a state school like UVA, which is still, the number 2 state school in the US. But even then, that was in 2016. But now, as these companies grow, the demand for talent, and these companies itself are just hiring like crazy. And I think a company like Facebook has like doubled in size, or maybe even tripled in size since I worked there in 2017. And by no means in 2017 was this a small startup, right? Like, Facebook's been around since 2006. So what has just really surprised me is, wow, these companies like Amazon, for example, Facebook, Google, they're hiring so much. They're really talking to everybody. And it used to be like, oh, I couldn't even get an interview. But now it's like, oh yeah, maybe people in the top, let's say 30 schools, top 50 schools can get an interview actually at these companies. And that's something that surprised me, because it wasn't always this way. There was a day where it was like, oh yeah, I didn't go to Stanford, or Harvard, I can't work at Facebook. And that's not the case anymore.
Interesting. What's your advice for somebody deciding between working at a startup and working at a FANG?
Yeah, so I've done both, man. FANG was great. Pay is good. Brand reputation certainly helps. But if you can choose your startup intelligently, it can really change the trajectory of your career. For example, I would have never written this book if I hadn't worked at the startup I did, because there is something very real about the autonomy you get at a startup if it's well run, and the amount of scope of like how many different hats you can wear that you'll never find at a big company. Now, again, I realize that's not what a lot of people are optimizing for. There's enough people who are optimizing for a steady paycheck and just like good work-life balance. And you will find that at FANGs to some degrees. Even Facebook, I had some not great work-life balance. And I know there are, I hear similar things at Amazon that it can be pretty intense. But I think just the general scope of work you can do is just insanely bigger at a startup. And I think for learning, for someone like me who's a generalist, that's amazing. I think for
That's cool.
specialists working at internet scale of Facebook or Google, that's amazing. And like if you're just about trying to like do data engineering at the biggest scale, you go there. But if you want to learn more different types of skills like marketing, sales, product management, at Facebook and Google, they have a Stanford MBA who's ready to be a PM like this, you know. But at a startup, it's like, oh yeah, like if you want to be a part-time PM or like steer this
Mm,
project, or you want to be a data product manager, go ahead. I mean, there's no one to do these roles. And I
right.
think that's something that's when you're younger in your career, and you're really eager to learn, or you're just not 100% dead set on being an IC data engineer or data scientist who's just going to be the best data scientist. You want something more. You want to run a business. You want to see product. You want to see engineering. That's where the startup really starts making a lot of sense, even if pay is not as good.
Interesting. Actually, Guy Thompson says, every year that goes by working at a FANG company sounds more and more like working at any other Fortune 500 company. Well, I mean, part of that's literally true because these are
Yeah,
like Fortune 5 companies.
yeah,
I think all the FANGs are
exactly,
like the top 5 of the S&P at this point and
exactly.
drive like 25% or more of the direction of it. But yeah, I think
Yeah,
point taken. What's interesting too, what I find talking to people is that everyone wants to work with the FANGs, and the FANGs are taking a lot of the talent. I guess it's the Mangs now,
yeah,
Meta, but
whatever,
whichever.
man.
Yeah. But what's interesting is, these I would hate to call them legacy companies, but more mature companies, maybe not as tech savvy. They're having a harder time finding tech talent, and
Yeah,
they're the ones who need the most transformation, more than anyone else, because their situation is, I would say, precarious over the next decade.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on, maybe if somebody wants to go work at a non manga company, and just do that at a
Yeah, I
Fortune
mean, I
500?
can't look, a job's a job, and I don't,
Yeah.
everyone's at different places in their career, right? So I've interned at some smaller places. The startup I worked at was pretty good, but it wasn't like one of these rocket ship companies that everyone's heard about that became like a unicorn overnight. It was certainly nothing like that. So I think people should take the best jobs that they have. So I'm not in a position to say, oh, you shouldn't work at so and so company. I think people should just be smart about that and realize that, hey, sometimes if a company is like not doing so good, it can be hard to right ship, and like it's better off just not finding yourself in that position, which is why I
Mm,
emphasize so much like take your portfolio project seriously, take your interview prep seriously, take these things seriously because these effects compound, right? So if you don't take your prep seriously and you join maybe a more legacy company and they do layoffs next year, that's your problems just compound. You know what I mean? So I think I just want to, and that's where it goes back to mindset, which is where, we talked about what could I just tell people? It's like, hey, take this stuff seriously. You're going to spend, I hate to, Joe, I wish I was cooler and been like, oh, yeah, I live such an amazing, fun life. But truth is, I work a lot like most other people, and
yep.
I sleep a lot too. So most of my waking hours are spent working just because otherwise I'm sleeping or just like, doing basic activities like feeding myself or showering. So if you're going to spend most of your time working, let's take this stuff more seriously and realize we can be more intentional and structured about our job hunts and progression. And I think these days, especially in common, what's it called? The the vibe right now is like, it's about what you do outside of work, and like, just go with the flow, and it's anyone's market. You'll be fine. And it's like, hey, prioritize mental health. All those things are important, but I think just this emphasis of like, guys, you're gonna have to work on your job for a long time. It's a long career. Let's take this stuff more seriously. And I think even things like sometimes in different pockets of Twitter and LinkedIn saying like, oh, you should work on a weekend to study. That's like controversial. They're like, what do you mean work on the weekend? And the truth is, Joe, when do you write your book? On the weekends, right?
Yeah, really early in the morning and on weekends. Yep.
Exactly.
Because
That's how
guess
you
what? I
I
also I have a business to run too. So I
Yeah.
have 2 full-time jobs, plus I raise a
Yep.
family and everything else, right?
Exactly.
But
But
to your point, I think you find
yeah,
the time. If it's that important to you, you're gonna make the time for it,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, and here's the deal too. There's a lot of other people out there. I hate to use kind of out hustling you because I think it's a bit trite, but it's true, right? So you
Yeah.
put the work in and you get the results. But yeah, I've noticed that a lot of people right now are just kind of like, I don't know, just a bit aloof about He's like, "Oh, I'll be able to find jobs." Look, I've seen job markets turn on a dime real
Right.
quick, right? Things happen. So I'd say it's good now. Don't take it for granted, and don't burn bridges either, unless they're bridges that are worth burning. But that's
Right.
very, very rare. So,
I mean, think about it. What percentage of people working started after 08, 09? I certainly
right,
did. I only known good times with technology, right? And we're not even talking about the 01 crash. We're just talking about after 08, So I definitely think, and the other thing that's been really interesting that I've noticed is, with work from home, I think this is something else that I've seen as a misconception. I think everyone's thinking, wow, my Bay Area super high salary is going to stay with me, or my New York salary is going to stay with me because now it's work from home. When the reality is, hey, now that people can hire talent from anywhere in the US and Canada pays much cheaper salaries on average than the US, and these companies are opening up Toronto and Vancouver offices,
right.
that's going to put pressure on you. And it starts with Toronto and Vancouver this year, and then it starts going to the EU, goes to India, and like people just can't really see that or project that far, that basically. And I meet with really hungry people in India every single day who
Yep.
are like begging for the book. And and it's just sort of like, wow, like I don't know when that will happen and that transition will happen, but it's happening every day already. And I think that's another thing people don't realize is like how hungry people are. I mean, I'm an immigrant. My parents, well, I'm a first generation immigrant. My parents came from India. And it's like I can see how hungry people are in India for good tech
Oh, all the
jobs,
time. I teach at a university, right? And I get a lot of students, fantastic students from India and other places. And the crux I notice they have, and I want to ask you about this too. It's sort of the elephant in the room, I think, for foreign students here is you need to get a job after you graduate.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the clock ticks, and
Yep.
until you have to go back. What's your advice for students, foreign students who need to find work?
Yeah. I think it's the same as my advice for everyone else. I think just the thing is, if you know that this is the case, and a lot of them have like a 90-day clock after they're graduated, you need to be planning this from like the day you enter. You
Yep.
need to be putting in open source because let's be honest, it's not going to be a surprise because these programs, master's programs, are at least a year and a half, 2 years long. So it shouldn't be a surprise to you that this is coming. So I think like, hey, honestly, if you contributed to open source, I think people underestimate what they can get done in a year because it's like people usually
Yeah.
grind for a few weeks in January with their New Year's resolution, or they hear there's an upcoming interview, so they study for a few weeks, but they don't realize what can be done in a year of consistent like contribution or work.
And building
I
your
think,
network,
and building
right?
your network, building your open source contributions. If you worked on a project for like, just like 10 hours a week for like 3 months, you'd have a full on startup.
Oh yeah.
Like it wouldn't even be like a side project at that point. You could show people like, yo, I basically built a startup MVP. It's not just like some toy project,
Right.
and that what company wouldn't want to hire someone who's built a business MVP with some few paying customers and like really built something out.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I tell a lot of my students too, to be proactive, do it early, get to know people, hiring managers, everything else. But, the best time to do it, as you say, is right now, when you're getting here. Because by the time you're about to graduate, you're competing against everybody else trying to find work. And the fact is, a lot of employers, when they see that you're foreign, it's kind of like, it's expensive. It's going to be a headache.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know you either. That's the other
Yeah.
thing. So if I know you and I know you can do great work, like, makes it a bit easier to have that conversation. So, but yeah, this is probably the biggest question that I get in terms of hiring, at least from job seekers, because a lot of them are foreign students and they're just like, I'm between a rock and a hard place right now. Like,
Yeah.
well, and I know it sucks, but
Yeah. Yeah. But I think just this is, how do I say, this is going to be a disclaimer because I don't know too much about the crypto community.
hmm,
But if I was in that kind of position, or if I was starting out my career, I'd be paying more attention there because
mm,
that seems to be borderless. That seems to be like, hey, forget about your visa or whatever. We'll pay you in crypto. You can start next week, and we don't even need to know who you are. Just have your GitHub account, and we're all distributed by default across the world. A lot of these communities are international already by default because a lot of crypto is actually in Europe and Switzerland. Some is in Singapore, China. Like, there's a lot of people working on crypto right now. So I don't want to tell people to do that because I mean I'm not fully vested in crypto either and like a super believer, but it's just something to think about of like, hey, as the world progresses, maybe it's not so important to work in the US, or maybe the amount of with remote work and these international economies, maybe it's this kind of thing might go away in 5 or 10 years, which is why I tell more US based people to realize like, wow, if you had to compete with folks and devs across the world, you better be working on the weekend or be doing something.
Oh yeah.
You can't just coast after your first job or second job and say, oh, I have experience, I'm good.
The work ethic thing is something I have noticed actually. Like people in India, a lot of people I talk to there, they're working their ass off all the
Yeah.
time, because it's hyper competitive there. Here in
Yeah.
the States, people just kind of coast, and it's not like a national type thing.
Yeah.
Nationalism type thing. I'm just noticing like
Yeah.
it's just a difference in ethic, work culture, whatever. But it's just something I notice time and time again, and
And it's not even about India. It's like immigrant countries all over. Any
That's
place
true,
there's
right?
less opportunity and more competition.
Yeah,
That's what happens, right? And I don't think there's any fault here. We have a lot of opportunity and less competition. So why not chill out a little bit more? So I
right,
think that's just probably my advice there is just like, wow, people, that's some trend I'm seeing, which is
hmm
like, hey, as more and more of these markets get internationalized, if you're more US centric in your approach and thinking, you might not realize, oh, okay, there's a lot more devs coming online in other countries year after year, and there's a lot more outsourced work happening. And it doesn't have to be offshoring to somewhere like India or Philippines. It's like
right.
even Toronto devs now are really good and are willing to take maybe 2/3 the salary you are to do
I'm
the
seeing
same
the same
job.
thing in Central and South America right
Yeah.
now. Because the nice thing is these are all the same time zones as the
Yep.
US, and that's kinda cool.
Yeah.
So, I know, a few shops down in Costa Rica that are just killing it right now. Great devs down there, they all speak great English, and they're like,
Yep.
a third of the price you pay
Yeah.
here, so,
Same
you
way I've
know
heard really good things in Eastern Europe from like
Mm.
Estonia and
Oh, there's some great engineers in Eastern Europe.
yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, great.
So
That's awesome. Cool, kinda closing it out, I mean, for people who wanna find out more about your book, where can they buy it?
yeah, you can check it out on Amazon. It's
Cool.
just Ace the Data Science Interview, and it has SQL product. Sorry, it's SQL, coding, machine learning, probability,
Sick.
statistics, product sense, and the last chapter, which I love, is the case interview chapter, which is kind of like a boss
Okay.
chapter, which combines all the different concepts. Because as you've probably seen in these kind of data science and data engineering jobs, they often ask like one of these more open-ended designy questions like, hey, how would you build Uber search pricing algorithm? Forget about the metrics. Like, how would you go about building this thing? Or like, like what technologies would you use? You know, what databases would you use? How would you architect it? What algorithms would you use? What metrics would you track? So the last chapter, product on case studies, kind of encapsulates it all.
That's really cool. I'm glad you wrote that last one.
Yeah.
That's, like, super handy.
Yep.
So because those are the kind of questions I always ask too. It's very open-ended, like, "So how
Yeah.
would you do this?"
What do you like to ask? Let's leak one of your questions real quick. I'm curious.
I always ask about a project that you worked on. So
Yep.
again, projects are key.
Hmm.
And I just dive deep into it. So walk me through this. Walk me through your thinking process. Like, how did you come up with this? Why did you do it? Or solving a problem at work, or just any problem. Then I'll walk them through maybe a hypothetical thing we're working on right now, because I want to see. I don't usually ask any stupid questions like why are manhole covers round or anything. It's
Yeah.
just idiotic and doesn't
Yep.
really solve anything. But what I do tend to ask is, okay, so we have this problem right now we're working on. How would you go about solving it?
Right.
Right? Not in such a way that I'm trying to like steal their idea or something. I just want to understand like what's your thinking process,
100%.
and ideally, sitting down with people and kind of try before you buy. So we'll pay you and you just come hang out with us, work on some problems, you sign an NDA, we get some work done, and over a period of time we'll see how we work, because it's not just can you answer some cute questions or math questions or anything like that, but
Yeah.
it's like, do we like working with each other?
Yeah.
Right? That's the chemistry part. That's
Yep.
something that is hard to it's hard to gauge in like a single interview, I would say. Sometimes you just
Definitely.
know immediately,
Yeah.
but in a lot of cases there's just very subtle cues that people have, like, okay, like this person's really good in this area, we can work with them here, he or she here, and so forth. Here's maybe some areas where this might be a problem, and it's good to get those out early, because hiring in its own is like crapshoot. You can flip a coin on
Yeah.
a good day and probably still get it wrong, right?
Right. Exactly. Which
So
is why you see companies ask these really tough questions and have like 4, 5, 6 rounds of interviews.
yeah,
Like, candidates are always like, well, I don't understand why I have to do so many interviews. And it's like, hey, honestly, like, you don't want like false positives, right? It's this game of like, hey, hiring is time consuming and onboarding someone's time consuming. So you want to get it right, even
oh
if
yeah.
it means rejecting a few people who could have been good. So I'm curious, how long is your, like, you pay people for like a week to do like a week long, like kind of work trial, or how, or whatever
It just depends. Yeah. I mean, but the other, yeah, it totally depends, and basically their availability and stuff. But
Yeah.
also the other thing I found that works really well is we have a lot of meetups. So I just get to know a lot of people over a
Yeah.
period of years. And you kind of get to know like who's showing up, who's asking good questions, who likes to participate in the community, and who actually cares about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people I tend to filter, so if job opportunities come up and that maybe they're available, we talk. And I would say that's how I got a lot of really good, opportunities for myself, as well as hiring people. Is just getting to know them on a personal level through meetups and so forth. Because
Very cool.
it's a good gauge. It's sort of interviewing without interviewing, and you get to understand how they operate also in a social context, which I think is huge for being on a team. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in your more like consulting focused business, that's absolutely crucial. Yeah.
Right. Because you're not just sitting in the background writing code. Like you have to be talking to customers, and they're finding that person who has both the technical and the people skills. It's super rare, actually.
Right. Yeah.
It's hard to find. So yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah. Anything else you want to end off with?
I appreciate you for having me on, and everyone can
anytime.
check out the book on Amazon. And hopefully this was valuable, and I had really fun chatting about some of the macro stuff happening with the job hunt.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's an exciting time in hiring, and I wish you the best of luck with your book. I'm glad you wrote it. Just feel like you're doing awesome work, and big fan. So it's good to have you on, man.
Cool.
Till next time. Yeah. Thanks to the audience for the questions, and we'll see you all later. Have a good one. Thanks, Nick.